I have found that the weather on the west coast of Scotland has been very mixed this summer. It seems to me that every second day is either strong winds, rain, or both. As such, many of my multi-day adventures have been shorter and more local than in previous years. An example being this adventure to the rugged and remote island of Scarba, which is only 40 miles from my house. To circumnavigate the island involves going through some major tidal flows, including the Corryvreckan, which is the third largest whirlpool in the world. It should be noted that navionics charts mention the Great Race, dangerous tidal streams. Strong tidal streams with eddies, races and overfalls occur at certain places. Streams setting through the Corryvreckan are very dangerous, and at one time the Royal Navy formally classified it as unnavigable. If you follow my videos, you will know I often go through the Corryvreckan, but I time it for slack water or an ebbing tide. This time I timed it for a flooding tide. Hopefully this illustration shows why I normally avoid the flooding tide. As shown by the arrows, as the tide starts to flow up the Sound of Jura, the great mass of water starts to get restricted between the mainland and the islands. It's like restricting the water from a hosepipe with your finger. The now narrower opening causes the water to speed up and to come out with more force. The tidal forces are then intensified by the even narrower openings of the Corryvreckan, the Grey Dogs, as well as the other gaps at the top of the Sound of Jura. To compound things more, the water flows in a deep trench as it enters the Corryvreckan gap, and is then forced into shallower water as it heads out to sea. In the gap there is also a vertical rocky pinnacle which stops not very far from the water surface. As the now fast-flowing tide, which reaches speeds of 10 knots or more, hit the pinnacle, the water starts swirling, which creates a whirlpool. Therefore, to circumnavigate the island of Scarba requires great care and local knowledge. My journey started on a calm but heavily overcast morning in Lochetive, where I launched the boat. The day's forecast was for brighter spells and light winds throughout the day, and I was delighted to see some blue sky as I headed down the loch towards the sea. The falls of Laura at the Connell Bridge were quiet, as it was only a few days after neap tides, which meant that, relatively speaking, the volume of water flowing around Scarba would not be at maximum as in spring tides. Leaving the shelter of the loch, I was happy to see the open sea was calm. A large luxury yacht came out of Oban Bay, and I happily bounced over its wake after checking there were no other large boats coming out of Oban. Although early July, I found it a chilly morning, so landed on the island of Carrera to warm myself with a coffee and to admire the view. I was delighted to be back at sea, as the strong winds of late had kept me land-bound in the loch for a few days. The wind did freshen a little as I headed south down Carrera, heading for Easdale, but nothing to get concerned about. I cut through the Sound of Easdale and paused to watch some repairs being done to the harbour wall. Easdale is of course one of the old slate islands, but unlike Belnahua, where I was now heading for, Easdale has a healthy population. Belnahua, on the other hand, was abandoned by its population of around 200 people in 1914. Now only seagulls and seals inhabit the island. There is still lots of slate around, but life became too hard to live here, as there's no source of fresh water on the island, and precious drinking water had to be carried across fierce tides and stormy seas, even in winter. That hill you now see with the cloud in its summit is on the island of Scarba. So Belnahu is not far from the grey dogs and the Corryvreckan. To give the tides time to start flooding, I took a walk around the abandoned village, which would have once echoed with the industrial sounds of the slate industry, but now all I can hear is the symphony of singing seagulls. The sky brightened to show some blue, so I clambered back in the boat and continued south, past Flada and its lighthouse, and onwards towards the Black Islands and Lunga. My plan was to head through the Grey Dog's tide race, from the seaward side towards the mainland, then circumnavigate Scarba in a clockwise direction. This would mean I'd be fighting against the flow, which would give me time to manoeuvre and avoid the standing waves that form in the flood. My thoughts being that if I went in the other direction, then the fast-flowing water would carry me into the turbulent waves very quickly. Rounding the southern tip of Lunga, the sea turned flat calm as I started to head down the channel between Lunga and Scarba. The landscape became very rugged and felt very remote. I knew I was all alone in here, and if anything untoward happened, it would be up to me to get myself out of the difficulty. I took consolation knowing that if my outboard did stop, I would be swept away from the turbulent waters and not into them. I was now lining up for my approach into the Grey Dog's race, scanning the water surface for white water and areas to avoid. The tide was running well and in good form, as I could clearly see the standing waves at the narrow exit. Tide races like this can be very unpredictable, as large waves can suddenly appear in front of the boat if there are any tidal surges, so I was ready for anything, including a quick retreat if that was required. I zigzagged the path through the calmer areas. Steering a boat in such a strong flow of water is a bit like driving a car on ice. I avoid any sudden course corrections and let the bow glide with the flow. I could now see the northern channel out the exit was blocked by a standing wave. However, the southern channel was clear, and I headed for it, hoping at enough deep water on the Scarba side of the gap. A burst of quick acceleration as the full force of the flowing water tried to sweep me towards the standing waves. Then I was through, no problem at all. I have seen 2-metre high standing waves in spring tides, so I'm happy it was nearer Neeps. I was now keen to continue round Scarba and go through the Corryvreckan Whirlpool. I generally judge that if I can navigate the Grey Dogs, the Corryvreckan is not going to be much worse in the same conditions. But I was soon to find out that is not always the case. Except for a slight wave in the sea surface, it looked calm and inviting as I approached the Corryvreckan Gap. I checked I had plenty of fuel in the tanks, as I knew this time if the outboard stopped, I'd be quickly swept into the turbulent waters of the whirlpool. All was well, and I was looking forward to my passage. I know it's a very unpredictable stretch of water, but was taken by surprise when I found out just how unpredictable it is. Over on my right-hand side, I could clearly see the white water of the whirlpool, but what surprised me was how quickly a large rolling swell started as I continued into the gap, as the sea on either side was still pretty calm. Soon the swell was approaching 2 metres in height, and I could only see the whirlpool when I was on top of a wave. I don't mind a large rolling swell, but as soon as it starts to look as though it's ready to break, I felt it was time to turn and head back. I felt that the speed of fast-flowing water, plus the forward speed of my boat, would quickly sweep me into white water if I hadn't. I'm not a hero, and there is no point in risking getting into turbulent water when it can be avoided, so my plan was now to land in a sheltered bay at the start of the gap, and await the tidal flow to start easing off a bit. The fast-flowing water was now certainly lowering my land speed. I mused at the thought that these 2 feral goats were also waiting for the flow to ease, in case they slipped into the sea and were swept off. Not long later I landed in a little bay well out of harm's way. The cottage above the bay is the Scarba estate bothy, which is private, so not always open. I decided to check it out while waiting for the tide to ease. Although it's a lovely looking cottage from the outside, I would need to be pretty desperate to sleep overnight in it. Rat poo and birds' droppings were everywhere, and the smell mingled with the smell of damp plaster and decaying wood. I was glad to get outside again and admire the view from the front door. However, it served a purpose by passing an interesting hour in Scarba. I now wanted to check how the flow in the Corryvreckan was, so jumped back in my boat. The large swells had now receded, making it feel a far more docile place, though still full of power. Huge hydraulic boils and swirling eddies still broke the surface as I made my way diagonally through the Corryvreckan towards the island of Islad. I was giving the whirlpool a wide berth as it still spewed huge waves of white water around its perimeter. I hoped if I had kept far enough away, I could still manage my circumnavigation of Scarba. I did get through the Corryvreckan Gap as far as Islad. but then saw the huge wall of water blocking my way around Scarba. The great race was now kicking in, and I knew it headed out to sea as far as 10 miles. It was hard to judge, but I guess the wall of water was still around 2 metres high. So call me a coward if you want, but there was no way I was going to take that on in a 4-metre boat. I once again abandoned my round of Scarba and headed back. I did go as close to a whirlpool as I dared, but it too was rather frothy for comfort, so kept a safe distance away. It must be a spectacular sight in a big spring tide or in rough seas, so no wonder the Navy once classified it as unnavigable. I abandoned my attempt to go the full round of Scarba and headed past Flada Lighthouse again to camp overnight in an old abandoned slate quarry. I was keen to try out my new homemade bug-off shelter. It's a tarpaulin I normally prop on the boat paddles, but have now sewn midge netting around the sides and the front, and it has been a game changer when camping in the days that midges would normally eat me alive, as you'll find out in future videos. When the midges, which are very small mosquitoes, come out, I sit behind the netting so they can't get at me. I love slurping beer in the bug-off shelter, watching them try to get in and slurp my blood, knowing they can't get through the netting. It's also big enough to sit and cook my dinner in, whereas the tent is too small to sit up in. However, this particular evening had a nice breeze blowing, which kept the midges away, so I happily slurped my brew dog in the rocks, listening to the music of the sea. And then, when the sun went down, I happily staggered back to the tent and slept the night away. I didn't have a care in the world. The following morning was a grey start, and the forecast said the winds would pick up as the morning wore on. So I packed everything away and headed off into the new day. A smear of rain fell as I set off, but it didn't dampen my spirits as I had some fishing on my mind. I'd heard that the mackerel had arrived. So I stopped at a favourite spot and dropped some lures to the bottom. Sure enough, a few minutes later I hauled my first mackerel of the year aboard the boat. As there is no fish better than the taste of fresh mackerel, cooked just as they stop flapping, I landed at a little pier to cook breakfast, and thoroughly enjoyed my first fish of the year. Once it was scoffed, I headed on my way, as I was now happily heading for home. And I wasn't in the slightest disappointed that I never managed to circumnavigate Scarba. I had had a smashing time. Besides, I had done it many times before, when the Corryvreckan is quieter. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.